Hey guys, it's Mariana, and today I wanted to talk to you about my top 10 books of 2015. These aren't necessarily books that were published in 2015. In fact, most of them are not from 2015, but they are my 10 favorite books that I have read in 2015. Since this is a top 10 list, I'm not going to be going into much detail about any of these books or comics, but I do have reviews for most of them. So if you want more information, check the info box below and I will have the links to those reviews down there. And if I don't have a review, I will link the wrap-up or whatever video that I did where I discussed the book or the comic. So let's get started with the honorable mentions. The three honorable mentions that I have are comics that stood out the most to me in 2015, and that's because I actually had 10 books to talk about for my top 10, and I didn't want to completely ignore the comics, but I didn't feel like I could do a top 10 comics. So here are three comic book series that I absolutely loved. And the first one, or I guess at number 3, I have American Vampire. I don't think anybody's surprised here, and I have talked about this so much on this channel. I have read 5 volumes of this and already purchased volume 6, so this is definitely a big favorite for me, and I am so glad that I discovered this comic book series. At number 2, I have Nailbiter, and this is a comic book series that I completely randomly discovered at a comic book store. I had no idea that this existed, and I picked it up on a whim, and I immediately fell in love with it. It is a horror mystery comic book series, and it is fun, it is funny, it is creepy, it involves serial killers, and it is generally awesome. If I was forced to pick a favorite comic book series that is currently being published, I would have to go with Nailbiter. And for my last honorable mention, and the comic book series that stood out to me the most in 2015, I have to talk about The Crow by James O'Barr. Now, this isn't particularly the most fun comic to read because it is very, very dark, but it definitely stands out to me a lot, and it's definitely going to stay with me for a really long time because it is so unique and so different from anything that I've ever read. I'm a big fan of the film adaptation of this. The Crow is one of my favorite movies of all time, and there was no way I wasn't going to love this, but I did not expect for this to hit me emotionally as much as it did. And if you want to read a really powerful and dark comic book series, you can't go wrong with The Crow. Now, moving on to my top 10 books, at number 10 I have You're Never Weird on the Internet, Almost, by Felicia Day. This is her memoir that came out in 2015, and it is so funny and is so relatable. And if you are a nerdy human being and you like Felicia Day, you will love this book. I definitely recommend the audiobook because she narrates it herself, and I just had so much fun listening to it. At number 9, I have another nonfiction book, and it's Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I had no idea this book was going to be a big deal to me before I picked it up. I picked it up because I wanted to read it before watching Everest, the movie that came out this year, but I was absolutely blown away by this book. Of course, as a memoir, it is fascinating, but this has to do with the Mount Everest disaster from 1996, and I had no idea how much interest I had in the topic of mountain climbing. Because I read and enjoyed this book so much, there are a ton of mountain climbing memoirs that I want to read now, and my Netflix queue has exploded with mountain climbing documentaries, so this has definitely had an effect on my life. At number 8, I have A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and this was one of my most anticipated books of 2015, and it did not disappoint me. I had a V.E. Schwab novel as my number 1 book for 2014. This one, not quite number 1, but I still had so much fun reading this fantasy novel. It has to do with parallel worlds. I loved the magic system in this book that had to do with blood magic and elemental magic, and I cannot wait for the sequel. already have it pre-ordered. At number 7, I have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was my first time reading a Kazuo Ishiguro book, and I loved it. This is a beautiful work of literary fiction with some elements of science fiction. I have seen the movie before, and even though I knew the plot very well because the movie is very close to the novel, I still enjoyed it so much because the beauty of this book is in its execution, and it's a very character-driven novel. I loved this. At number 6, I have A Backpack, a Bear, and 8 Crates of Vodka, another nonfiction book. I was really having a good time reading memoirs in 2015, apparently. This I related to personally, obviously, because it is a memoir about immigration and about finding yourself in a new foreign environment. But also for anybody who has not dealt with immigration, this is an eye-opening book, and it is a wonderfully written memoir that has some humor in it, has some really kind of serious notes in it. It has a little bit of everything, and you will learn a lot. For my number 5, I'm going with The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. I need Leslie Walton to write something else because this is some of the most beautiful writing I have ever read, and this is the only book that she has written, and I need more of her writing in my life. This is a magical realism novel about a girl who is born with wings, and it is strange and beautiful. What can I say? At number 4, I have Child 44 by Tom Rob Smith, and this is a really good historical fiction thriller set in 1950s in Soviet Union, and this was adapted into a pretty bad movie this year. And don't judge the book by its movie adaptation. Just don't. This book is great. I could not put this down. This is part of a trilogy, and the other 2 books, in my opinion, are not as good as the first one, but this is totally a self-contained story. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger or anything, so you can just read this and be done. For my number 3, I decided to go with Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This was the first time I've read Neil Gaiman, and I immediately fell in love with his imagination and with his writing. This book just made me happy. This is the best way I can describe it. It's a fairy tale for adults, and it makes me happy. I would love to reread this. I need to read all of the Neil Gaiman books after this, and I'm in love. At number 2, I have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This is an adult dystopian novel, and it takes place in the before and the after of what became known as the Georgia flu, which is just a virus that took out most of the human population in the world, and this is pretty fantastic. I knew that I was going to reread this about a third way into this book, and I cannot wait to read this again. This is a really good novel. And for my number 1, my absolute favorite read of 2015, I'm kind of cheating a little bit, and if you have been following my channel for a while, you know what epic fantasy series have I read in 2015 and how much I love it. It is my favorite series of all time. I need the next book in my life as soon as it's available, which who knows when that's going to be. And of course I'm talking about A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm cheating because if I had to pick one of the books, I would have to go with A Storm of Swords because it is so good. It is one of the best books I have ever read, and definitely the best fantasy book I have ever read. But to be honest, my reading in 2015 has been defined by the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire, so I have to put this at number 1 because it is just on a different level for me. Even though it's a pretty big commitment, I definitely want to read this series again in 2016. We'll see how that goes, but that's the plan right now because I just cannot get enough of Westeros. That's it for my favorite books and comics that I've read in 2015. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I would love to know what your favorite reads of 2015 were because I'm always looking for recommendations. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I hope you're having an awesome day, and I will see you soon in my next video. Bye!